Mabel hadn't mowed the lawn in weeks. Weeds crawled over the stone path, and the old porch swing creaked in the wind, like a memory of a time when the house was filled with laughter. Now, there was only silence, dust, and an old woman who brewed a single cup of coffee every morning and stared into the empty guest room. That's where the portrait of her late husband George stood. Stern eyes, a perfect side part, and a Marine's uniform. A man she had never loved, but lived with all her life. That day she was standing by the window when she saw the boy, a black teenager, in a plain t-shirt, holding a trimmer, mowing the neighbor's lawn. His movements were calm and confident. Mabel watched him for a long time, then stepped outside. "Hey boy!" she called. "Want a few more dollars? My yard needs trimming too." The boy stopped, wiped his forehead, and walked over. And in that moment, Mabel lost her words. He looked like George. Not the George in the portrait, but the George she saw only once, at their wedding. Young George! Or, no, she knew that face better than any other. It was Reggie, her first and only true love. A black boy she had secretly dated when she was 18. The boy her father called a disgrace and a threat. The boy she never saw again after her father drove her out of town. His eyes, those same warm deep eyes, now looked back at her. Mabel nearly lost her balance. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, steadying her by the elbow. She didn't answer right away. She only whispered, "What's your name?" "Jamal," he said. Jamal rose. Mabel sat down on the bench. Her hands trembled. Her breathing grew shallow. Images spun in her mind. Beach evenings. Reggie's whispers. His promise to run away with her. And the sight of his back as he walked away for the last time. This boy. It couldn't be. But he was like a ghost from the past. And she had to know the truth. She invited Jamal in for lemonade. He hesitated but agreed. They sat on the porch, and Mabel studied every feature of his face. His nose. His cheekbones. Even his smile. It was Reggie's smile. "Are you from around here, Jamal?" she asked. "Yeah. Born down south. But my mom moved us to Detroit. I'm back for the summer, just trying to earn a little cash." "And your mom? What's her name?" "Linda. Linda. 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 Rose. She passed a long time ago. She always said she didn't know who my father was. He left before I was born." The name meant nothing to Mabel, but the story it hit her like a brick. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them with a napkin. "You never tried to find him?" she asked softly. Jamal shrugged. "Thought about it a lot, but all I have is an old photo, from my mom, and a letter. A weird one. I never really understood it. A letter. Do you have it?" "It's in my backpack. In the car. I can grab it." Mabel nodded silently. A few minutes later, Jamal returned with a yellowed envelope. She unfolded the paper, and froze. It was handwriting she recognized. Reggie used to write to her the same way. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone, but I'll always be with you. She must never know. I can't ruin her life. But know this, you are my heart, and you must be strong." Mabel felt the world disappear around her. She clutched the letter and whispered, "Reggie." Her voice was so faint that Jamal barely heard it. "Did you say something?" "No. Nothing," she replied. "Just, this letter. I think I know who your father was." And in that moment she realized her whole life had been a lie. And that the boy in front of her, he wasn't just someone who looked like Reggie. He might be her grandson. But Mabel didn't know that someone else in town was watching Jamal. And that person knew the whole truth. At night Mabel couldn't sleep. She sat in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, and looked at the old letter she held in her lap. Her fingers traced the lines Reggie had written as if they were wounds that hadn't healed. It was obvious Reggie had a son. And this son was Jamal's father. But why had Reggie never told her? Why had he disappeared so suddenly? And who was Linda Rose? She had never heard that name, even though she had once known Reggie's life down to the last second. Jamal came back the next day. He was wearing the same plain t-shirt, his hands covered in oil. He had been helping old Mr. Clark with his car, but as soon as he saw Mabel on the porch, he smiled, and she felt his heart clench again. They sat down on the porch again. "I've been thinking about that letter," he said, "and about what you said. Do you really know anything?" Mabel nodded, but before she answered, she looked across the street. There, in the parked gray car, sat a man in a hat. She had seen him before, a week ago, and here he was again. "Jamal, do you know anyone from who could be following you?" "What?" "There, in the car. This isn't the first time he's been here." The boy turned, and for the first time his smile faded. I don't know, but I saw this man under my dorm in Detroit. Twice. I thought it was a coincidence." Mabel felt a chill on her skin. Something was wrong. She didn't know what secret this boy carried, but it was obvious he was being watched, and maybe not just out of curiosity. After the gray sedan had disappeared around the corner, Mabel closed the door of the house and turned the key. For the first time in years, she felt real fear, but there was also determination in her eyes now. She had to find out more, not just for herself, for Jamal, and maybe to make up for old mistakes. She went up to the attic. Among the dust, cobwebs, and old boxes, she found a wooden box. She hadn't opened it since George died. Inside were letters, newspaper clippings, and one unstamped envelope that said, "Do not open unless ready for the truth." With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was another letter, from George, and she couldn't believe her eyes. "Mabel, if you're reading this, then I can't protect you anymore. I found out about Reggie. I knew everything before we got married. I ruined his life because I could. I thought I was saving you from disgrace. But now I know I did the worst. He begged for a chance. I sent him to the army, on the front lines, where he died. I'm sorry. I've been afraid all my life that the truth would come out. And maybe it has. Forgive me, if you can." Mabel covered her face with her hands. Her husband had destroyed her love. He had robbed her of a future. And now, decades later, she held this letter in her hands. Late, but the truth. She knew Jamal had to know this. But she also understood. The truth was not just an answer. It was pain. And it was danger. Especially when someone like the one in the gray car was still guarding old secrets. That evening Mabel made tea, set the table on the veranda, and waited. Jamal came as he had promised. But this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a woman. A tall woman, with dark curly hair, and a piercing gaze. She was holding an old photo album. "That's my mother Leon," Jamal said. "She wanted to come alone. When I mentioned Reggie's letter, she turned pale, and she said she had to see you." Mabel froze. Her heart was pounding like a truck engine in the cold, but she invited them to sit down, and before anyone could speak, she took George's letter from her pocket. "I found this letter today," she said, "and it changes everything." Leon picked it up, and began to read. Tears welled up in her eyes. She was silent for a moment, then looked straight at Mabel. "It's not your fault. It wasn't your fault that my father died, but the people who made decisions for others, they didn't know what they were doing. Mom said Reggie was good, but he suspected something. He was sent away because he knew too much." "What did he know?" Mabel asked. "That your husband George wasn't just a lawyer. He was in the Internal Affairs Department, which was responsible for whitewashing scandals. He covered politicians, clergymen, even the military. Reggie was a guard for a general, and he saw more than he should have. He tried to leave, and then, it all began." Mabel felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. "And Jamal?" she whispered. "Why are they watching him?" Liana pulled out a photo. It showed Jamal, a baby in the arms of a man in an army uniform. But the man wasn't Reggie, and it wasn't even George. "This man is Michael Thornton, Reggie's former friend, then enemy. He's alive, and I'm afraid he knows who Jamal is, and he's afraid he'll talk, or find out the truth." They want to make sure no one finds out what happened that night in Panama. The evidence is gone. But Jamal, he's the last piece of what can be erased. And they know it. Mabel shivered. You're in danger, boy. Jamal stared at the photo, then at Mabel. If I'm a piece of something, then someone needs me. And maybe it's time to stop running and give it all back to them. The next morning, Mabel took out a phone book from the old chest. Yellow, tattered, stained by time. She hadn't opened it in a long time. But one name was still clear: Harold Kane, a former private investigator, and also a friend of George's. But not a close one, more like a cautious ally, who knew when to keep quiet, and when to seek the truth. She dialed the number. The rings went on forever, until a hoarse but familiar voice answered on the other end. Mabel? Damn it. I thought you were already in the nursing home. I thought you were already in the ground, Harold, she replied. But there's a case. Old. Very old. And very important. Harold arrived 2 hours later. He was carrying a file of documents and an old camera. When he saw Jamal, he immediately became wary. Who is it? This could be Reggie's grandson, Mabel said. And Reggie, you remember, didn't just disappear. You said it yourself back then, that things didn't add up there. Harold sat down. He took out an old tape. This is a copy of a video I made in 1985, a military base, Panama. I was there as a technician, and then, I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. Mabel stared at the screen. The image was shaky, but she could see a group of soldiers. One of them was definitely Reggie. The other was taller, more stocky. It was Michael Thornton. They were arguing outside the hangar. He said, "I'm not going to keep quiet anymore." And Thornton said, "You've signed your own death sentence, Reggie." 2 days later, his body was found in the water. Officially it was an accident. But I knew it wasn't. I just didn't have the evidence. And I was afraid. Mabel wiped away a tear. And now we have proof. And we have Reggie's grandson. Maybe his only family. Harold looked at Jamal. If you really want the truth, boy, we're going to have to raise the old ghosts. And it's going to be dangerous. Thornton is a senator now. He's got connections. He's got money. And he's not going to let us dig into the past in peace. Jamal stood up. I'm ready. If my grandfather died for the truth, I'm not going to let it die. They're not going to kill the memory. Not this time. The town was as peaceful as ever. But in the old house, at the end of the street, a storm was raging. Not a physical one, but one that blurred the lines between past and present. Mabel sat with her phone in her hand, reading an article Jamal had just published in the local newspaper. There was a photo on the front page, Reggie in uniform, smiling, and next to it was a copy of his letter, the story they tried to bury, the truth about the death of Private Reggie Rose. The story was called. Inside were excerpts from Harold's video, copies of military reports, Reggie's letter, the testimony of a neighbor who had heard George arguing with someone the night Mabel disappeared for the day, and most importantly, the names. Thornton, George, military conspiracy, racial hatred, betrayal. The explosion was instantaneous. 2 days after the publication, reporters arrived in town. Senator Thornton held a press conference, calling it a fabricated attack. But the next morning, 2 FBI agents came into Jamal's office. They had warrants, names on a list. Old cases were being reopened. Mabel watched it all from the window. She didn't leave the house. She just waited. Until that evening, when Jamal came to her house himself. He was calm. He was holding a box. "What are these?" she asked. "Mom's things. I found another letter among them. But this one wasn't for me. It was for you." Mabel opened the box. She pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. The handwriting was painfully familiar. "Mabel, if you're reading this, you know. I couldn't tell you then. I knew George would kill me if he found out. But I don't regret it. Linda is our daughter. She has your eyes. And I hope, your heart, forgive me for everything, and love her if you ever meet her. Reggie Mabel pressed the letter to her chest. Her eyes filled with tears. Everything fell into place. Not only was Jamal her grandson, but Linda was her daughter, the daughter who was taken away, who was never allowed to know who her mother was. I didn't know, Mabel whispered. Jamal sat down next to her. But now you know, and we can start again. Together, they sat in silence for a long time. Mabel looked at the old portrait of George, and for the first time she didn't feel afraid. She stood up, took it off the wall, and carefully placed it in a box with her belongings. Time to forget the one who was silent, and remember the one who fought. The sun was rising in the window, and in the yard, a green neatly trimmed lawn, a true symbol of a new beginning.